As the old saying goes, what works? Teamwork! Hey guys, MasakoX here. Here on this channel, we like to take a deeper look at some of the more nuanced and less discussed topics within the frame of Dragon Ball, which some people tend to not notice. But then again, sometimes we do like to indulge in our more hype side and the occasional list video, but hey, it's our fandom, we can do what we want with it, so long as it does good for the show. Regardless of all of that though, today we are asking you something which you might be ready to answer, or it might not have come across your mind before now. Who is the most iconic duo in Dragon Ball? Well, I have an iconic character, Masako, but duo? Give me a moment with that. Well, okay, that's fair enough to think, but in reality it should be no surprise that Dragon Ball characters usually come in twos. Sometimes during the story, these people paired up with more than one person as they changed in personality, or their character arcs evolved over the passage of time. But when you sit down and take a look at the bigger picture across the entire story, a lot of characters that later went on to forge their solo careers started out as a part of a duo, where their models and personas were less refined and their existence and overall structure required the presence of another foil to help bring out their quirks, or else they would be completely unrecognizable to what they are today. And this isn't a new trope of Dragon Ball either. This goes way back to the beginning. You could deliberate about which pair was the first or the most influential. You could discuss many things like Goku and Bulma. You could even think that Krillin and Goku were a pair for a while, but not really. They didn't really spar together. They were more of a pair due to them being close friends, which doesn't sit with our idea for this video that much. Goku and Bulma, yes, that's very true, and I would argue that being the most iconic, but some people might not think that. There are just so many good examples. But when you go back to the original Dragon Ball series, one of the earliest true examples is that of Yamcha and Puar. And of course, well, as Ten Shinhan and Chaozu. But yeah, Yamcha and Puar were the first pair that we encountered after we established Goku and Bulma. This was the first pairing where we could say, yes, this is what you can expect from Dragon Ball. He was one of the firsts. I mean, he has one now at least. As well as the first overtly superpowered fighter since Goku didn't have one other than martial arts, and wow, Yamcha really came on strong back then. And yes, we know Roshi was around at the time and he was stronger than Yamcha, but for now, he was just an old man on a hillock in the sea. Yamcha and Puar? I mean, they did stuff. Now, of course, these guys aren't the only examples, or else our discussion topic would be a little thin on the ground. Naturally, we have more examples of this trend later on in the story. There's Vegeta and Nappa, Dr. Gero and 19, 17 and 18, Shin and Kibito, Babidi and Dabura, Kale and Caulifla, and even Goku Black and Zamasu. Even though technically these cohorts are basically the same person, only with different disguises, which make things weird, yeah, but it's also okay because they are two entities from different timelines. Man, Dragon Ball was weird with timelines. Now, we have to be realistic and state that such a way of showing characters working within a specific environment is not anything new. Dragon Ball did not make it. It's not limited to Toriyama storytelling, but you have to admit that there is an awful lot of these double acts and double introductions in the series to warrant discussion, as well as thinking about how Dragon Ball would basically be nothing like it is without it. If these guys were only solo acts, they did things without their accomplices by their side to provide important progression on many different levels. You might think it's not that big a deal, but think about it. How might it affect Yamcha without his aide Puar to provide moral support at an important time? Would Vegeta have been just as imposing without his hype man by his side? There are so many questions that would significantly modify how we perceive certain personalities within the show. Toriyama himself was asked about this in a special interview from V-Jump, in which he said the following. The interviewer asks, Vegeta and Nappa, Kibito and Kaioshin. When they first appear, these characters certainly do often come in pairs. Toriyama then responds, well, that way I'm able to explain the characters and their relationship to each other through their interactions. In my case, I feel that it isn't good to insert too much narration. I suppose Goku and Bulma are representative of that. As a child, Goku doesn't know anything of the world, so without Bulma, he'd be a character who didn't say anything. The interviewer replies, "I see. So that relationship has been firmly passed down to the relationship between Beerus and Whis." Toriyama responds again, "For parts like where he wakes up for the first time in 39 years, Whis clarifies things for the sake of exposition. No narration necessary." So as you can see, duos was something that Toriyama heavily relied on to get his plot across to the reader and then later the viewer and make it seem realistic. Toyotaro, albeit less often, does this too, with the likes of Moro first being seen with the likes of Cranberry, you know, that one guy from the Frieza saga, that random soldier, needing his piloting skills and navigation to get to the Dragon Balls on New Namek and do his thing. He does rid himself of this very important character the first chance he can, but without Cranberry's intervention and someone to actually bounce ideas off of, Moro might not have done things the way that we saw them happen. But, okay, back to the original story. The double acts were a clever way to help Toriyama introduce elements of the plot in a much more organic way. Instead of doing things and exposition via narration and text boxes, he doesn't really like to do that. Or maybe having characters doing either an internal monologue or an external one to nobody in particular. You know, those times in some of the older localized dubs when, if you could compare them to the Japanese one, there'd be normally silence, they would just then stick in dialogue to pad out the quiet period in order to make things more obvious, like people in the West couldn't understand nuance. Sure, people do think internally, but narratively, it can be a little forced. We know what sometimes happens when you overdo exposition in Dragon Ball media. But the main focus which we are talking about today is the idea of duos. And the thing about duos is that people who research fiction, casually or professionally, have come across a lot of different types of duos. It's not just two characters who happen to share the same space and the same basic drives. That's a little too simplistic. You see, there are multiple archetypes like with any type of storytelling. You need to know how these pairs work together in order to make them memorable. Unlike with teams, like with the Ginyu Force, you have loads of people to work with and bounce off of. It's much easier to make a good team than just having a good pair of people. For example, there's the trope of the dragon and the big bad, where the dragon is usually the penultimate challenge for the hero before encountering the main villain of the arc. It was something that played out a lot in examples of tabletop endeavors, as well as classic video games. You have multi-stage final battles, where you would have a very intimidating boss, and you would think that this was the final one, but wait! There's somebody even more powerful after that one, and you gotta face that guy. I mean, I hope you got plenty of health items. In a sense, this niche is taken by characters such as Ginyu, Nappa, and Deborah. Wait, MasakoX Ginyu? Really? Yeah? Him being the strongest guy in the entire Frieza force, second to Frieza of course. You could consider him the second in command of the entire battalion, and Frieza regards him and his team as very important, so in a way, in that sense, Ginyu is the dragon to Frieza's big bad. That's one of the less obvious duos though, as, like I said earlier, we attribute Ginyu to his own team rather than him working with Frieza specifically. As for 17 and 18, well, they would be more akin to the classical evil duo, with 17 being the more fun-loving one and 18 being the pragmatic type. You couldn't just have two people who were identical in the same pairing, or else how would they develop or bounce off of each other's characters over time? 17 and 18 people think, oh, they're completely identical. Well, they're not. In fact, if they were the same, it would make things deteriorate, since it's commonly said that your own worst enemy is yourself. The same classical archetype works with Black and Zamasu. Black seems to be the more brutish contingent of the double act, and even passes up his chance to get immortality for himself to get stronger, which ultimately leads to the unraveling of merged Zamasu. And that's the Saiyan showing, and the inspiration for what I did with the What If Goku Black Turned Good video. While Zamasu is the brains of the operation, it was actually a really good means of defining the two Zamasu. Zamasai, yeah. But if Goku Black had been just identical in personality to Zamasu, just another clone, then things would have been much less interesting. There are of course many more types of duos that we can find in Dragon Ball. There is of course the odd couple, to which we can add the modern relationship between Goku and Vegeta too. These two, you would normally think that they would despise working together. They would just not work and be a complete failure when in the same room. But despite all of the odds being stacked against them on paper, They are able to pull something off and get the job done. Most of the time. Unless you're Vegeta stuck inside Boo, which then leads to Earth being blown up. Yeah, that wasn't one of Vegeta's finest hours now, was it? Then there is the big guy, little guy motif, in which the little guy is often, but not always, the leader. This one is very common, with Yamcha and Puar being the first one, arguably, but Vegeta and Nappa being the most obvious. Or there's the those two bad guys guy trope, the one that seems the most interesting for the context of Toriyama's interview that we referred to earlier. The those two bad guys trope are a pair of bad guys who not only provide bloodshed, but also important bouts of exposition in the form of conversation between themselves. When your series is mostly based around action and depends upon it, and periods without the action are not recommended unless risking boredom amongst the readers or viewers, you can speed through plot progression and exposition with just a quick scene with a little bit of conversation, and then get back to moving the plot along through other means which are more palatable. It's a good stopgap which seems normal. People do talk to each other. Now this is not to be confused with the those two guys trope, though the two aren't mutually exclusive. In this guise, they are usually foils for each other to play off of, commonly Brains and Brawn, and sometimes Red Oni and Blue Oni. They probably also look different, in such ways as Fat and Skinny or Salt and Pepper. If you had two guys just look very similar to one another, you would have to work very hard in terms of their character and personality to make them stand out in any way, but why, as a character designer, would you make it so hard for yourself? We feel that outside of these classifications, there are some very individual but very Dragon Ball-ish traits of the duos that a lot of them have. First off, most of them start out their tenure in the show looking surprisingly menacing. This is in order to make an impact and then build from there. If you don't start off strong in Dragon Ball, you are very prone to being forgotten about or pushed off to the side on the grounds of running out of ideas quickly for them. Think Tarbell. When compared with their later appearances, you can be a little looser, and they tend to soften up or evolve. I mean, they're there, they're here to stay. I mean, even Puar in his original appearance is somewhat menacing. I mean, come on, think about it. This is a character who can transform into anything. You've not had a character like this before, and you have no idea what they might turn into. They are pretty good at it, and despite their cutesy outward appearance, they could be useful when needed. Secondly, they are all incredibly smug and arrogant, full of themselves, before their collision with the Dragon Team, usually Goku. This is natural in a world where Goku is the great leveler for any character, and if you want to last long in this franchise, organically, then you better just take the L and just work alongside the Saiyan, or else you will not last long. Thirdly, most importantly, usually one of the pairs stays in the plot for longer, and gets more attention in the narrative, as proven by Vegeta, Tenshinhan, Yamcha, and 18, with 17 being absent for a very, very long time until most recently, with the likes of Puar and Chaozu having a minimal role later on as well. One has to ask where this will put the likes of Whis and Beerus, who are the newest prominent duo in the future. Well, despite them being, arguably, the strongest characters in the main cast, they've already managed to become the butts of multiple jokes within the show. So they didn't even have to be bested by our heroes to begin to head towards a sillier place within the show's dynamic. Nevertheless, they've still become iconic. That cannot be denied. And while the way of introducing characters in pairs has become a little bit tired in more recent outings of the show, we still like our Dragon Ball duos. After the Saiyan saga, the most iconic duo to us would probably be Vegeta and Nappa, but nowadays we would not be surprised if the most iconic Dragon Ball duo for most of you would have been Goku and Vegeta. I feel really bad for Nappa right now. But when push comes to shove, we are going to say, Haverock and I, that the most iconic duo of the entire series would be Goku and Bulma. They are the ones that started everything, becoming the true original double act of the show. Yeah, okay, we are being very technical here. They are the protagonists of the original Dragon Ball, but only a little, we are saying. After all, what could be more iconic than that original pair, eh? If these two did not meet, if Goku and Bulma did not meet, then Dragon Ball would have been completely and utterly different. Also, if you want to check out how I'd do that in a what if, just check up there. So what do you guys think? What are your iconic duos in Dragon Ball, or favourite duo types? Are you tired of them, or do you love them? Leave a comment below, and let's get this discussion going, and I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!